So, as the political climate heats up in Nigeria and the presidential race approaches boiling point, Arise News has begun holding a series of one-on-one presidential interviews to help voters learn about the presidential candidates on their ballots. The latest in line to take part in these voter education activities is the flag-bearing candidate of the main opposition People's Democratic Party, or PDP, Atiku Abubakar, who's given an exclusive interview to Arise News. It's generated both tremendous interest and considerable controversy on social media, and tonight, helped by a panel of experts, we'll analyse what he had to say. But first, here's Atiku Abubakar's opening words in that exclusive interview.
I may have to take you back to my political journey or political history. If you recall, even when I was trying to run, to be the governor of my state, from old Gongola state up to, present-day Adamawa state, I ran 4 times before eventually I was elected as a governor, and then never served to become a vice president. And basically is, I am driven by passion and the desire to give back to this country or to my society what this country has done for me. Because if I were to be born around this time, I don't think I would have been that fortunate, that lucky to become what I have become today. So I am more or less driven by the passion to give back to the society what this society or this country has done so much for me. So basically, this is it. So it is not a new thing, either in politics or even in history. We have several leaders all over the world who have made attempts to serve their country. One of the greatest presidents, in the American history is Abraham Lincoln. He was somebody who ran up to 5-6 times before becoming the president of the United States. At this my age and what I have been able to accomplish, I don't think I desire anything more than the passion, to serve, my country and my fellow countrymen and women. So this is what is the driving force behind my persistent desire, to serve my country and its people.
Some within even your party struggle to accept the idea of another northern president after what will be 8 years of a northern presidency under President Muhammadu Buhari. And this has found new expression, this resentment, when it was perceived that you rejected Governor Wike as your running mate, given that he's one of the bright hopes in the PDP. So why did you choose Governor Okonkwo as your running mate over Governor Wike? And how do you plan to unify your party so that Governor Wike and his supporters get behind your candidacy?
Abiola, I also want you to recollect that I have contested this presidency a couple of times. And any time I lost, I did not try to blame anybody. I would first of all carry my grievances through the court law, to the Supreme Court. Whatever the Supreme Court decides, I accept. And then I move on and I plan for the future. So first and foremost, I don't think that Governor Wike was not rejected. Nobody was rejected in the party. But the point is that you must understand it is the prerogative of the candidate to pick his running mate, a running mate that he believes he can work with amicably and then also deliver, the policies of the party and also try to unify the country. If you can go through history, I was given a ticket in 2007. I picked a Southeastern, an Igbo. I was given a ticket in 2019. I picked an Igbo. And in 2022, I'm given a ticket, and I picked an Igbo man again. Consecutively, this is just to show you my desire to unify the country. So I don't think Governor Wike is a brilliant politician, is courageous, is tenacious. I believe he has a future in this, in the political, evolution of this country. So it is not that, it's not a question of rejection, certainly not. I think it's too harsh a word to say that, we rejected Governor Wike, certainly not.
And that's the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, the PDP, Atiku Abubakar, speaking exclusively there to Arise News. And with me now in the studio, a top crop of analysts who, for the rest of the program, as we watch excerpts from that interview, will give us their assessment of the coherence and substance of what Mr. Abubakar had to say about various policy issues. Dr. Okey Ikechukwu is a well-known national and international affairs analyst and member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper. Mahmud Jega is a popular Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper. And Dr. Obiora Okonkwo is a political economist and professor at the University of Abuja and at Nnamdi Azikiwe University, where he takes on both undergraduate and graduate students. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me start with you, Mahmud Jega. How presidential did he look and sound to you?
I think he had a good outing. He was composed, he was matured. He brought his long experience in politics and in government to bear. And he looked a bit nice and healthy. He could have been a bit more firm and more aggressive, but on the whole, I think he didn't have a bad outing in the Arise interview this morning.
And Dr. Okonkwo, let me ask you, you are a political economist, you're a professor. How much interest do you think this interview has generated? I mean, there's been a lot of talk and reactions on social media, hasn't there?
Oh, yes. I've been following some reactions through the day. This is one of the first major interviews he has had since he picked the PDP ticket. And as a matter of fact, for His Excellency Atiku Abubakar to remain politically relevant at this stage, hearing from him that he's been contesting this post since 1992, there's something about him and that make him a very great politician. So the interest has been enormous. People have been yearning to hear from him, and I've heard from him. And I think we have to wait for other reactions. Yes, there have been some critics coming from here and there. It's this season. They will pick on everything, his words, his policies. But I think by and large, it is good that he's talking now, because people have been worried about what's going on with PDP and their campaign and their candidate. Now we know he's here, like my colleague here has said, he looks healthy. At least that's a good thing going for him. And I could see a whole lot of confidence. He didn't talk much on many issues, and I've had some analysts ask why he didn't elaborate more. I saw him talking more like somebody who has been there, seen it all, and is more of action than talking. He talks from experience, and it's quite interesting. He will have other opportunities in other interviews and occasions to elaborate the depth of everything he has said today. This is the first outing.
Okay, let me come to you, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu. I appreciate your patience there. What stood out for you in that interview? And obviously we're going to be taking excerpts of different sections of the interview, but just broadly speaking, what stood out for you?
What stood out for me really is what I might call the absence of a sense of urgency. and also the extremely general nature of his observations and contributions. This is somebody who has been vice president. He was vice president for 8 years. They were responsible for the NEETs program, which are the seats component. They were involved in privatization, the disengagement of a certain level of entitlement from governments. It was under their watch that the legislators' quotas were sold. So one also expected a slightly broader policy spectrum kind of conversation, other than the general thing about whether he chose an Igbo or an Urobo or whatever. The leisurely, yeah, it might convey the ambience of confidence and authority, but I also see a lack. I was asking myself, if this is somebody in office and there are really urgent issues, should we be talking like we're having a party beside a pool? I'm concerned about that, with all due respect to the gentleman.
Well, yes, I mean, that you're perfectly entitled to your sort of observation, and I would suggest, and I presume a lot of people would probably agree with you, that that's a valid point that you make. Let me come to you, Mahmud Jega. Do you think he had a good grasp of his own policies and was clear and fluent in putting those across?
Well, in some instances during the interview where he was recalling from his experience and direct involvement in some of the policy issues, he was clear and precise. But there were certain areas where he probably has to be clear. Like, for example, when he was asked about the ongoing transformation of the NNPC, which is one of the biggest economic issues in the country right now. He was a bit unsure. He described it as secretive, and he didn't know what was happening. Now, anybody who becomes president next year, that is one of the major issues that he will have to confront. There are other things, probably as you take on the clips. For example, when he was asked the issue about pastoralism and the herdsmen, he said it is an issue for the states to resolve, not a federal one. I'm sure many people will disagree. It is not only a national issue, it is probably an international one as well, because when you have the herders moving across not only state but international boundaries, I don't think any individual state on its own can solve that problem without cooperation with others and the federal government. So there are areas probably where he has to sharpen his message.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. Let me come to you, Dr. Okonkwo. What sense did you get of what he's likely to continue from the current APC government and what he's likely to change?
Well, I see him presenting himself as somebody who has been part of a team from 1999 to 2007, who knows what to do. He has his mind clear. He gave us some stories about his views on energy, his views on privatization, but because he wasn't number one, he couldn't get them all through. So I see him as somebody who's going to hit the ground running. I can identify with him, being also somebody from a private sector. There's really no much time for talk these days. You have to really get into actions. So I see him hitting on NNPC. Last 2019 election, when he hinted about his intention to privatize NNPC, it was such a controversial statement. It was turned upside down, and people make a whole lot of news out of it. But today, the process is on. So I see it as one of the things he's going to continue with. From the information available to us from NNPC CEO, they're trying to go to list the company by next year. I don't know whether it should be second quarter or third quarter. But if at all this happens during the tenure of Atiku Abubakar, should he win the election next year, it will be a seamless process. So I think that should be first and foremost what he has to do. But for what is going on with MPC now, I think he will have to do a whole lot of re-engineering for him to succeed, rather than just continuing what's on ground, because from what we can see, a whole lot are not going right.
Right, okay, we've jumped the gun a bit, but we're going to come back and talk a little bit, certainly about the economy, NNPC, and all the rest of it. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of Atiku Abubakar's exclusive interview with Arise News. Stay with us. And along with a panel of experts, we're analysing the Arise News exclusive interview with the presidential candidate of the main opposition People's Democratic Party, or PDP, Atiku Abubakar. He is, of course, a veteran of Nigerian politics and past vice president who's tried severally to be president of Africa's largest economy. He's also 75 years old, which seems to illustrate that leadership in Nigerian politics remains firmly in the hands of older men and doesn't necessarily reflect the youthful demographic of the country. So what's Atiku Abubakar's vision for Nigeria? What plans does he have for the country if he wins the presidential election in 2023? Well, here's another snippet from that exclusive interview with Mr. Abubakar talking about, among other things, the economy, the newly commercialized state oil company NNPC, and the motive and rather controversial issue of subsidy.
I will support exchange rate is a central CBN's policy. I am not expected, to interfere as such. But what I expect to see is that I expect to see a convergence, of the CBN exchange rate and as well as the parallel market. This is what I expect to see because, I am a market-oriented, person. I believe in the forces of the market. So this is what I expect the CBN to achieve.
Sir, you've described the unveiling of NNPC Limited as a step in the right direction. What exactly is your vision for NNPC?
My vision of NNPC was the kind of vision we have with the LNG. In other words, privatizing substantially, NNPC to the private sector in the stock market, so that whereby as many Nigerians as possible, as many people, also even abroad, can acquire shares. This will improve, first of all, transparency, efficiency, and also root out corruption, and then also increase the profitability and sustainability of the sector. Yes, the government has announced that it is started privatizing the NNPC, but a lot needs to be done because it appears that it is being done secretly. In other words, nobody, Nigerians and other members of the international community, have not seen it in a transparent manner. If you ask me honestly, I do not know how it's being done.
Let's talk about your manifesto. Looks like the subject of removal of subsidy is conspicuously absent in that manifesto. Is this an oversight? Even if it is not?
It's not an oversight, but I thought Nigerians have now come to accept my position on the issue, of subsidy removal. Recall that when I was vice president, we had designed subsidy removal in 4 stages. And I was the chairman of subsidy removal committee. At that time, I worked very, very closely with former Governor Adams Oshimole, who was then president of the NLC. And we removed subsidy phase 1, phase 2. And by phase 2, by the time we finished phase 2, we had left office. We expected the next PDP government and the late Umaru Yar'Adua to continue with the phase 2 and phase 3. That would have ended the issue of subsidy. But unfortunately, the policy got stuck. For one reason or the other, I don't know, because I had left the government. So I think it is inevitable that it has to happen, but it has also to be accompanied. And if you recall what we did in phase 1 and phase 2, the NLC made demands on the issue of transportation, on the issue of allowances, increase in wages, which we all met. And then we removed phase 1 and phase 2.
Atiku Abubakar, the presidential candidate of the PDP, talking exclusively to Arise News there. And still with me in the studio, assessing what Mr. Abubakar had to say, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, a national and international affairs analyst and a former member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, Mahmud Jega, Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and Dr. Obiora Okonkwo, political economist and professor at the University of Abuja and at Nnamdi Azikiwe University. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us, and particularly thank you, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, for being patient with us. You're in the off-site studio, so it's a rather lonely place to be, but thank you so much for staying with us. He talked there about the NNPC, subsidy, etc. What do you make of what he had to say about that, and particularly about subsidy, which is increasing to more than 4 trillion naira and still going up?
What I think is that after listening to that delivery, the question I ask myself is, even among the Nigerian elite, what percentage of Nigerians will understand what he just said? That's number one. Number two, the emphasis on NNPC creates the illusion that if the privatization is gotten right, Nigeria will change. Look, quite frankly, I find this observation conspicuously depressing, but I may be wrong, for 3 or 2 reasons. Nigerians are not hungry today because NNPC is not generating money. Nigeria is not giving money to 40 million, allegedly 40 families because of NNPC. It is because people can no longer go to their farms. It is because there's insecurity. It is because all local economies are collapsing. So Elijah Abubakar's excitement about NNPC and the general air that it's about getting the oil sector wrong suggests a looming calamity from the angle of policy. The Nigerian state is not where it is today because of NNPC, with all due respect to those who hold a contrary view. So if what I'm looking at is the perception of a redeemer going forward, and like Mahmoud mentioned earlier, you could see the disarticulation. You know, it's not like he's looking at somebody who has had some policy thought and there are things he's planning to do. They are, if you like, conjectural. I may be mistaken, but that's the impression I get. So if from that excerpt you ask me now, Okey Ikechukwu, where do you see His Excellency Alhaji Atiku taking us going forward if he's sworn in as president today? I think what will happen is that he will set up a committee to find out what the problem is, and then some people will review it and get back to him. Without prejudice, whatever other views there might be, I find that as an indication of what we should look forward to, very, very uninspiring.
Right, okay. Well, thanks for your thoughts there. Let me come to you, Mahmud Jega. What do you think he came across as being a little vague and perhaps less forthcoming when it comes to his policies? I mean, he didn't seem to be very familiar. I don't think that particular clip came through in what we played, but he didn't seem to be very familiar with the Petroleum Industry Act, and that seems surprising given that the NNPC is a vital part of this country's lifeblood, which is oil.
That is true, although he was extremely clear on one issue, which is the removal of subsidy. And you see, it was courageous of him, because don't forget, in the ongoing implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act, the assumption was that by April this year, subsidy would have ended as soon as NNPC transformed into a private entity. But clearly the Buhari administration decided that it will be politically suicidal to end petroleum subsidy at this stage, even though it has virtually bankrupted the country. And I thought it was courageous of an opposition candidate like Atiku Abubakar to say that there is a clear understanding that subsidy has to end. So in that respect, he was very, very clear. But overall, on the issue of what to do with NNPC and the oil industry, he was not so clear. He sounded vague and said the process is being handled secretively, which is strange because there is a Petroleum Industry Act, which took nearly 20 years to promulgate into law. I know it is very difficult for anybody to read because it is such a bulky document, but for a major politician like him, somebody should at least summarize and let him familiarize himself, because he has to take some very firm decisions if you are to win the election next year. And as Dr. Okey said, if you are not very clear on that, that's when you have situations where you set up committees and the review, and that will waste time, considering that this act took nearly 20 years to get passed and signed into law. So he must get his message clearer overall, although he was very clear on the most sensitive issue, which is the removal of subsidy.
That's a very good analysis there. And let me come to you, Dr. Okonkwo. What about his take on the markets and the economy? I mean, did he seem like a liberal market person to you? Did he come across as a true private sector person?
Oh, yes. His take on allowing the convergence of the two rates from a free market position shows that is free-minded and a private sector-driven person. But however, I know that I had expected to hear from him if he's happy with the rate Naira is today, because he left the government as a VP in 2007 when Nigeria was below 150 Naira, and it was stable for a couple of years. So allowing it to fall or converge on a free market basis, is it at this level? Would there be anything economically, policy-wise to be done to strengthen the economy? Because the rate of Naira against the other foreign currencies is determined by the strength of our economy, both export and manufacturing activities. So I think we would have started from, no, I don't like this rate. We need to give greater value to Naira, or this rate Naira is good for my economic policy. That would have, from there I would have understood better. But on the other issue, I have a good understanding that he just wants to get done with NNPC, privatize it and move on. He has said in one of the interviews, I don't know if it was before or in the front, that he had proposed selling 10% of NNPC share to some investors that would have raised about $30 billion US, and that would have helped them sort out a few things during his last administration. I think it's very clear. I also believe getting NNPC right is very, very critical to so many other things we are doing. It is. That is where we are sapping in the subsidy. That's where 70 to 80% of our economy is coming, the finances for running this economy is coming. So paying attention to it is very, very critical. So I really think that moving forward, it is important for His Excellency Alhaji Atiku Abubakar to say clearly what he has to do on certain issues. Read my lips kind of a thing is not a solution. Nigerians are very hungry to hear what he has to do. And he's talking from a position of authority. Someone like me can interpret him. I can identify with him. I can understand him. But it seems a whole lot of people want a lot more of breakdown. 1 hour is not too much for so many things to be talked about. But I encourage that moving forward, he and his team will have to look for a forum like this to talk more in other stations and as quickly as possible grant interviews to break down some of these issues. but I can identify with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, stay with us, gentlemen, because tonight we're taking a closer look at what the presidential candidate of the main opposition People's Democratic Party, or PDP, Atiku Abubakar, has had to say in his exclusive interview with Arise News. Mr. Abubakar has, of course, been a top civil servant, prominent businessman and philanthropist who's made a fortune from his various businesses. He's made several attempts at the presidency, and he says he's offering his credentials in 2023 as a seasoned political operator and serial entrepreneur. Credentials, he says, are the remedy for Nigeria's many ills. But his critics point to accusations of financial impropriety against him in a country where corruption is a huge challenge. Mr. Atiku, though, denies any wrongdoing and says the charges are politically motivated. Here he is talking exclusively to Arise News about how he made his money.
Unfortunately, the fact that you are a public officer does not stop you from engaging in business. I was telling somebody the very first day I resumed duty at Idiroko border station, I was not even married. What I realized was that one of the most lucrative business ventures then was buying a Peugeot 404, putting bench at the back and conveying passengers between Lagos and Cotonou or Ajashe, Port Novo. And as a young officer, I walked into the ACOA in Apapa. I signed a form for hire purchase, and I took about 5 of them. And I came back to Idiroko, distributed them to drivers, and they were ferrying passengers between Lagos and Port Novo, and I was making my money. So I have been doing business from day one.
Okay. But if you were a public officer and you were doing business,
there is no conflict of interest. The fact that you are a public officer doesn't stop you from engaging in legitimate business. There is no law which says that you cannot engage in legitimate business because you are a public officer. No law. Well, to tell me the law.
Atiku Abubakar, and still with me in the studio assessing what Mr. Abubakar had to say, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, National and International Affairs Analyst and former member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, Mahmud Jega, Arise News Analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and Dr. Obiora Okonkwo, political analyst and professor of politics, or a professor, he's a political economist rather, and a professor at the University of Abuja, and also at Nnamdi Azikiwe University. Thanks for staying with us. Let me come to you, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu. What about him talking about the fact that he was running a business when he was a civil servant, and there's nothing illegal about that? I mean, beyond legality, the legality of it, did he come across as being unethical? Did it strike you as a conflict of interest?
Well, on the matter of being unethical, no, it's not unethical to do legitimate business while in public office. But the possible suggestion of conflict of interest arises from the fact that he was in the border and therefore very likely in charge of the traffic and so many other things. So it presents a situation where somebody can readily say, well, if he was the one in charge and he has 5 vehicles, who knows, he may have been smuggling with it. So that possibility is there. But I'm not sure we're talking about, Nigerians are talking about Idiroko and things that happened when Adam was still in primary school. It's a question of general perception and more recent times. And I personally took on Alhaji Atiku Abubakar on the matter of corruption while he was vice president. You know, the news was so strong that the impression was even that the president then was going to fire him. So I called Garba Shehu, who was then his special assistant, and requested a meeting. And surprisingly, the vice president obliged, and we met in Mambela Street around Aso Drive. And I placed all the facts before him as a media person. These are the things. Based on what we are seeing, I'm convinced the allegations are true. What do you have to say for yourself? I was impressed by it. He just relaxed, and for close to 1 hour, 20 minutes, He went through the issues one by one. Now, the matter of the fact, and what others, including President Obasanjo, have said, may be on the table, but that one-on-one encounter had its effect. He obliged immediately. But if he thinks that the explanation is given about 404 in Ediroko addresses the subsistent perception of some integrity deficit, it will be a mistake. And I would like to key into the suggestion that the narrative of an Atiku presidency cannot be served by this kind of interview. The space has to be taken over. And if he's going to give an interview, he has to be better briefed. There has to be a briskness to it. There has to be, you say that executive communication is usually indicative mood. It isn't. So I thought I should put all of that on the table. But he should bear in mind, and his handlers should know, that his comments on the perceived suspicion of a peculiar kind of history in terms of economic terms, no, it's not going to be shaken by any talk about 404 in Ediroko. Right. They must do better than that, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that. Let me come to you, Mahmud Jega, and we've just got a few minutes before we have to take a break. Did he appear to have operated within the principle of what a civil servant is expected to do, such as, I don't know, declaring your business assets, those kinds of things? I mean, because it doesn't sound like he did that, although we don't know that for sure. I mean, but broadly speaking, does any of that raise concerns for you?
Okay, you see, just like Dr. Ike said, some years ago I interviewed Admiral Murtala Nyako. That time he was governor of Adamawa State, and he told me a story that when he was a young naval officer in the 1960s, the only business that military officers were allowed to engage in was farming and animal husbandry. So he reared a lot of cattle, which he inherited from his father. He was clear about that was the only business military officers were permitted to do. Now, I don't know whether the same rule applies to the customs or to the other civil servants, because we will hear from them. Well, right now, I know that a lot of civil servants, you know, they have shops in the distributive trade, they have transport vehicles, and usually you can say that, okay, those ones probably do not present a conflict of interest with their work in the public service. Although, as Dr. Oke said, it was problematic for a customs officer in charge of the border, because many people will say, if these vehicles come, maybe carrying contraband, the small customs men will say these ones belong to Oga, therefore they should pass. So therefore it didn't sound very nice. In any case, 5 Peugeot 404 vehicles on the Idoroko border probably does not explain being a billionaire, right, as it is alleged now. So he must have engaged in other bigger business since then.
Okay, we've got less than a minute, Dr. Okonkwo, so keep it very, very brief. I apologize for that, but you've heard what was said so far. What's your take on it?
Well, on a normal day, the story of Ediroko would have been an admirable story for any civil servant to emulate. But being politics and political time, political communication is very critical. So I think that he has to be careful. He was just trying to prove to the question how he made this money that he has been working hard from the onset and has been very legitimate in everything he did. But stopping at Ediroko left a whole lot of questions to be answered.
Right.
So there is truly no bad question in politics. What you may have is a bad answer. So I think you will have other opportunities to throw light on other things. But for me, if you're a civil servant, and as long as you do not take your work hour to go and do other jobs, you shouldn't be offending anybody. And I should think that this is something we should emulate.
Right.
I can identify with that story. As a student, I set up my business and things were running. So it's a kind of story Nigerians will have to emulate, and all civil servants and even other public officers.
And just to back tag that very briefly before we take a break, I mean, that presumably was during the military era. and the military tends to suspend the constitution and operate by decrees. So a lot of people are talking about what would have prevailed in a constitution, in the constitution, what it allows, but you've also got that slight anomaly because it was a military government. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of Atiku Abubakar's exclusive interview with Arise News. Stay with us. And you're watching a special edition of Arise Prime Time with me, Charles Anyegolu, along with our panel of analysts. We're assessing what Atiku Abubakar, the main opposition presidential candidate, has had to say in his exclusive interview with Arise News as his party, the PDP, seeks to reclaim power from the ruling All Progressives Congress, APC. As you know, in June, Mr. Abubakar announced his running mate for next year's election, Ifeanyi Okowa, a former senator who's into a second four-year term as governor of Delta State. Previously, in the 2019 presidential race, Mr. Abubakar had chosen Peter Obi, who's now the presidential candidate of the Labour Party and who's enjoying huge popularity amongst the youth. Here's Atiku Abubakar talking about Mr. Okowa and Mr. Obi.
How much is Governor Ifeanyi Okowa of Delta State bringing to the table? And if former Governor Peter Obi did not leave the PDP, will you have chosen him a second time as your running mate, considering how he has gained considerable momentum? Although you say that's social media, but there's something called the obedient movement that is gaining very serious momentum. In your private moments, do you feel sometimes, oh, maybe I should have invited Peter Obi back? But basically, how much is Ifeanyi Okowa bringing to the table?
Now, first of all, this is a guy that is very brilliant, very well educated. He started political career from local government to a commissioner, from a commissioner to a senator, from a senator to a governor. So in terms of all political parameters, he really has got the experience. And experience matters quite a lot. As I announced in my statement, I am seeking for a vice president who from day one can be a president. So he is calm. He has acquired a lot of experience. He is intellectually brilliant. So these are some of the reasons why I picked him.
So you don't miss Peter Obi?
Well, they are two different people. They are two different people. Not that I don't miss Peter Obi, but unfortunately, Peter did not consult me. We were going on and on and on. Then suddenly I heard he has announced to be in the Labour. I think he informed me 3 days after he declared for Labour. So he did not even consult me.
Still with me in the studio, assessing what Mr. Abubakar had to say, Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, a national and international affairs analyst and former member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, Mahmud Jega, Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and Dr. Obiora Okonkwo, political analyst and professor of political economy, both at the University of Abuja and also at Nnamdi Azikiwe University. Thank you for staying with us, gentlemen. Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, let's start with his take on the ethnic considerations for a vice presidential candidate. Did he seem to you to be liberal enough, all-embracing enough?
I think so. Fair commentary. I mean, he felt, he by his own announcement and by the record of his engagement, nobody can contest the fact that consecutively he's chosen people from the Southeast, from the South and specifically the Southeast, and more particularly people who can be said to be of Igbo extraction, Of course, there was the little controversy about whether Ifeanyi Okowa is Igbo. I dismissed that controversy by simply asking those who are raising the objection to answer this question. What is the meaning of Ifeanyi in any Igbo state? Does it differ from the one in Delta State? If the answer is no, let's rest the matter. I also like his assessment, the reasons he gave for picking Okowa. You know, actually shows he gave some thought to it. That this fellow went through the mill from the lowest level up to the government. That means he has capacity for political engagement. Of course, the other question that may then arise for him is, are you saying that Wike, who was strong on the card, doesn't have similar experience? But I noted that Elijah Atiku said he is calm, and I suspect very strongly that may not be the right epithet if he's talking about our good friend Wike. So part of the concern was that you might actually have an alternate or competing or substantive dual presidency with Wike, which is not likely to get with Okowa. Okay. But his response, which came off the cuff, indicates that he thought about it. That's a plus.
Okay, let me come to you, Mahmud Jega. What about what he said about Peter Obi? I mean, did he seem dismissive of him and the phenomenal support that he's generated, or did he seem cognizant of that phenomenon, briefly?
Well, I think there was a sign of hesitation when he was asked about Peter Obi, because probably he would think that Peter Obi might have brought more political muscle to the ticket. But then there is no need crying over spilled milk. He has left the party, and if you say anything very good about him, it's like you are undermining Okowa, who is now the current running mate. So I saw that hesitation. But I think the most important thing that came out was he talked about a running mate who, if you win the election, you can work with amicably. I think that's the most important. It was some kind of backhand indictment of Governor Ike, who everybody knows is very, very pushful. Exactly.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. A final word to you there, Dr. Okonkwo. You've heard Atiku sounding calm and reasonably measured. Is that likely to be the way the campaign will go? Will we see the candidates focusing on the issues and the policies, or are we likely to see them going on the lines of personal attacks against each other? And we've got less than a minute, so please keep it brief.
Well, the three major candidates, Atiku has indicated in this interview that he's a very good friend to Asiwaju, the APC presidential flag bearer. And at the beginning of this primary process, Peter Obi had said publicly in many occasions that Atiku is his boss, and he did not even intend to run against Atiku, that he was only going to go into the race if he was specifically zoned to the southeast. So there are men that will obviously campaign with mutual interest for each other. But I am aware that in 2019, when Atiku picked Peter Obi as his presidential, vice presidential candidate, it was very, very controversial. They had a lot of issues, and people from Southeast, especially from the governors, rejected that. And then they said that was probably the reason why Atiku got lesser vote than PDP normally get in Southeast. So it is obvious for me, as nicely as he may be sounding here, Peter Obi probably was not on his ticket as VP, and that was one of the reasons actually Peter Obi may have left PDP.
We're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Obiora Okonkwo, Mahmud Jega, and of course Dr. Okey Ikechukwu. I want to thank all of you exceedingly for your sterling analysis this evening. That's it for this edition of Arise Primetime. Do join us again from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.